Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for being there. Once again, this is Rafa with Mystic Times and my dear new friend, Chance Garton. I have a question, Chance, because, well, we're going to see, first of all, we're going to see to look at these cards that I drew, and we've been speaking a little bit behind the scenes to maybe take a look also at the I-Ching and do some divination to represent whatever the energy of today or of this period in time. But since we're doing that, now I thought, oh, I need to ask you, Chance, is that really your name? Or where does that name come from?
Yeah, that's my real name.
Amazing. Wow, your parents were like hippies in the 70s or something like that to give you such an interesting name.
Actually, no, I did receive my name in an interesting mystical way. My dad had a great aunt. I think her name was Dot. I never actually met her that I can consciously remember. It was his great aunt. So it was my great aunt. And she once, whenever my mom was pregnant with me, she met with my mom and dad, and they thought she might be like kind of a little bit slipping, maybe a little senile, because she rubbed in my mom's tummy and it was like, how's little baby Chance doing in there? And they had some different names in mind, but then when they heard that, they're like, I think that's the one. So in some amazing way, spirit came through her and prophesized what my name would be. So, a lot of people, whenever they begin their new life and their spiritual journey, they might pick a different name. And that's actually even reflective of the ancient mystery schools where, like, the priests of the Old Kingdom of Egypt, for example, whenever they finished their initiations into the priesthood, they would get a new name, and they would have this ceremony that also gave them a new birth chart for their new life. And they would often pick a name that vibrationally and numerically, as well as the date that they do the ceremony on. They pick these things to enhance and compensate for any particular weaknesses that they might have felt existed in their previous life or their previous birth chart. But for me, I had the right one from the jump. I had my mystical name already at the beginning of life. I appreciate that a lot. I think it's a blessing of a name because it reminds me all the time of like the sort of illusory nature of the ego. Not that the ego is something to be destroyed or removed or anything like that, but that it's only part of the story. It's not the full truth. And there's no such thing as chance. Everything has meaning. Everything is for a reason. Everything is cause and effect. So I look at that like my name gives me a reminder all the time to be absent of concept, however possible, to be open to whatever the truth is in that moment, rather than holding to a previously set belief or something along those lines. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think, how they say, maybe like, I think it's particularly in people with senile and dementia, those kinds of things, how they are like sort of, I think I've heard the reference being used that they're like a skipping record or something like that, where the needle is like going to different places. So I can totally see how they are like skipping time in a way that allowed her to like know that your name would be Chance, and so she like closed the loop and brought it up, then creating that future that she was maybe seeing, not
It's
knowing
a trip,
that it
isn't
was
it? It's
her.
trippy.
Just like in those time travel movies, how at the end it turns out that the main character was actually the one that spoke to himself and told him to go become himself and stuff like that. Feels
The
kind
end
of
is
like
the
something.
beginning. The end is the beginning is the end is the beginning is the end is the beginning.
And so,
Yeah,
all
so
right,
cool.
if you want, we can move to the interpretation of these two cards. So I'll just point out the general meaning for these, and you've already told me a little bit of that you feel like these cards talk to or speak about the conversation we were just having. So as I understand them, the Three of Swords, okay, it's pretty clearly, it's got to do with feelings and emotions and the heart, and the swords going through it, and there's cloud and rain behind it. So it's like a kind of a hard or a difficult emotional moment, a difficult emotional period, perhaps in a person's life. If we were to, I didn't ask any particular question when I drew them. It was more like what are the cards for this moment, and they came up. You know, when cards like this and like this, when they come up, sometimes you're like, oh well, maybe I want to shuffle a little bit more and draw again, because they are strong and very symbolically very powerful cards, you know. So number Three of Swords, as I was saying, relationship, difficult, maybe like breakups or confronting emotional things that are very difficult for somebody to look at, perhaps, or to transcend and integrate. And in that sense, I can see what you were saying, you know, how it relates to the healing process. It's definitely, I believe, like a specific, like a stage. That's the word I was looking for in the healing process. The confronting of the shadow, the confronting of those aspects of ourselves we don't want to recognize that are there.
Yeah, I look at it like, so a lot of people will see that card and the first thing that jumps to mind is heartbreak. But there's really so much more to it than that. I wouldn't even call it heartbreak myself. The swords and the going through the heart represent confronting feelings, represent also that rain cloud behind it is the release, the water element being emotion, being feeling. And so, yeah, there could be a context with that has to do with separation that you didn't want in some sort of a relationship with another person or a friendship. But like, it all depends on the context in which you get the card. And there's a positive meaning and a negative meaning that could come up, and then there's the reversal meaning. And so you have to kind of like intuit, is it the positive or the negative in terms of the context of where it's showing up in your intuition. And also on the reversal, there's like a positive reversal and a negative reversal. So like the general meaning of the card, though, I would say has to do with staying strong even when you're facing something hard and moving forward anyway. It's like courage. It takes courage to put those swords through your heart and feel the stuff that's in the core, and communicate and express what's in the core. The swords representing the element of air, representing thought and communication. So you're facing what's in the heart, and it was always there, but now you're like creating a channel with these swords for it to come out and come through. And you could also look at this card as like expressing yourself, even if there are going to be consequences for that, in a sense, like putting it all out there, and maybe even having to confront somebody or something with this. But it's mostly there to remind us that we need to stay true, hold true to ourselves, and even stay rational, having to do with swords and logic and thought, that even if there is doubt within you, even if you're experiencing some sort of conflict or have failed in some way, that the failure and the conflict are temporary, that it's up to you to hold true to yourself and express your feelings even through the clouds of it. And so when it comes to what we've been talking about with the tuning processes that we described, that actually for many people, it's not a guarantee, but for many people, they'll end up crying at some point during the session, or, you know, bringing something from within themselves to consciousness that they were holding back and not feeling. And that takes bravery to go into a session and be open enough to get to the root, to the inner core of stuff that might have been in your heart the whole time, but was being held back and not being felt or experienced or expressed. So the Three of Swords, it looks like a scary card, or it looks like a difficult card, but it's a very powerful moment of cutting through blockages and, you know, the moment of truth, you could call it. Revelation. Truth hurts sometimes. But that's because it's a destructive process that's there to remove that which you don't need anymore, that which isn't you. And the Ten of Swords that you got as well, I'll let you jump into that, but it's actually very, very similar in terms of the meaning.
Yeah. When you were just speaking about this other card, this Three of Swords, it feels like one of these cards that is talking about the looking and confronting the shadow. You know, many of the cards are more how to put it, more happy or easier to digest, let's say, because they're speaking more at possibilities of expansion or of increase through joy, and this one feels like it's talking about that same expansion, but through going through something that's difficult to confront, just like you were saying. And then we have the Ten of Swords. This one is like, what the fuck? This symbol is like extremely powerful. A person lying down with, I don't know if all 10 swords are going through him. The one
They are.
In the head
You've
seems
got
to
10
be,
swords in him.
For a moment it feels kind of like it's behind the head, but he's got 9 to 10 swords going through his body, and he's like completely surrendered, which if you were to look at it from this expansive, let's say, point of view, and not from fear of this shadow aspect, you could say, okay, it's a card that's asking for surrender, for letting go, for accepting whatever is going down, whatever's going on and going through you, just being present with all of that. And at the same time, it feels like the swords are all going down the spine. You were talking about working with 7 or maybe with 9 chakras, and I think you mentioned 2 more. So maybe it's even got something to do with that.
Absolutely. Because it's one of the 10s, the 10s represent the conclusion of a cycle. So with the swords represent truth and communication, realizing, recognizing, and expressing. And the 10 of Swords looks like, a newbie might look at that and be like, oh, okay, so I'm going to get killed. But what's in the positive sense, the positive meaning of the 10 of Swords is actually the termination of the false self in whatever way that the context of the reading may represent that. So it's actually, it looks like it's scary or it looks like it's death, but it's really like a catharsis moment. It's you're no longer in illusion. You're in complete understanding. Kind of like the moment of when you transition out of your body, you'll no longer be in any confusion about whether or not there is such a thing as spirit, or whether or not your existence goes on after death. And so this is like also, you mentioned surrender, but part of this card is also like hard work. It took hard work to get to this point. You're paying attention to detail. All 10 swords are there, so you have the whole picture. And it's swords are about precision and insight that penetrates past lies, really. So if we get this card and it freaks us out, or in context of the rest of a reading, it feels negative or scary, it's probably because there's something else that's been described in the reading, some other facts about who you are or your situation that are now being brought to recognition that are in some way making you uncomfortable because you've been lying to yourself, or you've been hiding information from yourself. So, you got to face the consequences, kind of like confronting the the feelings of how you really feel with the Three of Swords. Those two go hand in hand together. You know, there are negative meanings to the Ten of Swords that are more apparent on the surface level, like actual self-destruction or something very hostile or whatever. But we're not looking at it in the context of the physical wounds or physical pain or breakdown or ruin. It's more, I think, in the context of what we're talking about with the rest of our conversation up to this point, will eventually require some sort of facing of what it was that was holding you back, the hard feelings that you rejected that maybe need to be felt to be brought back into circulation and to restore that stuck self energy to the rest of your flow. But the interesting thing about one of the interesting things about the tuning process I do is that there are some modalities that require, or they say that it is required, that if you have any like unprocessed grief or sadness or sorrow, that you need to feel it for and like go through the feeling of it for it to be made whole again. But in my experience with tuning, that is not always the case. Like I give the opportunity to the client that if it's right for them to feel those feelings, then they will, and that's fine. But that actually, on an energetic level, we can just put that energy back in circulation and move on. And I give them the opportunity or the option to do that without necessarily having to remember something traumatic or feel difficult feelings. And so what is right and best for them is how it'll go. And I surrender that process to their higher self and to their spiritual guides. So it can go either way. But yeah, Ten of Swords is definitely like the grand finale. Mm-hmm. We've seen the whole picture, and we are now ready to do the hard work of integrating each and every one of these details of who we are into the whole.
And to segue a little bit into this other part where we're going to look at the I-Ching, perhaps. I also remember in Chinese, in Chinese philosophy, let's say, the metal element is connected to justice. So in a way that justice is also present there, because it's okay, the whole cycle has been completed, and now what's just, what's fair, what's correct, what's necessary right now is coming up, is going to be shown, to be expressed. So yeah, I just wanted to add that tiny thing that you made me remember from Chinese philosophy. That's a very interesting system. You know, how they have 5 elements, and there's a few that are the same as let's say the Western system, but then they kind of diverge. You know, you have the wood element, you have the metal, and I love how they have this whole circuit or circle, that one element brings the other, and that one brings the next, and so forth, and one is like kind of, you know, how like like in Pokemon, you know, you have the fire Pokemon is powerful against the plant or whatever Pokemon, and the plant against the water, and the water against the fire, and you kind of close that loop. And if you went the other way, they are weak against the opposing thing. So there's that kind of cycle in the Chinese thing, which I find very, very interesting.
Yeah, and then in the actual I-Ching, they work with 8 elements, although they're really working with the 5, but there are a few things layered on top of that, like the yin and the yang, and it's not exactly, the I-Ching isn't exactly the same as the 8 or the 5 elements of Chinese medicine, but there's 8 trigrams, they're called, and when you combine all the 8 trigrams with each other in pairs, you get 64 possible configurations of how energy can operate in consciousness. So one of the methods for the I-Ching, actually, before we get into this, do you mind if I share something?
Sure. Yeah.
Because we were doing, we had both of these swords cards come up, which is interesting. And I have this in my group of friends on Telegram. Over the past many months, we've been collaborating on a unique tarot deck where I think there's, I don't know, maybe like 16 of us that have divided up the tarot into a few cards each, and we're designing our own deck, and who knows, we might actually make it. But one of the cards I got assigned was 10 of Swords, and I haven't completed that one yet, but I also had 2 of Swords, and I did this last night. I thought it'd be fun to just share. I made this version of 2 of Swords last night.
I love it.
It's a character, Finn, from Adventure Time, holding up 2 swords, and he's standing instead of seated, and he's got a joyful expression, because I wanted to really like bring the energy of, you know, what if you had 2 great options rather than looking at all the choices of life as like a right or a wrong and being concerned about if you're going to make the wrong choice, and instead just follow the one that feels the most fun and trust that life, even if it gives you what feels like could be interpreted as a mistake, it's still there for your growth. So there really wasn't anything wrong about it. But yeah, I made this last night. It was a quick Photoshop drawing that I did. Pretty fun. Now I'm wondering what to do for 10 of Swords, because that is a pretty heavy duty imagery usually. So I threw some coins while you were talking a moment ago for the I-Ching, which is really interesting dynamic in terms of what we got. So when you throw coins for the I-Ching, it's like more precise than drawing cards out of a deck. Although again, there's not really a wrong way to do it with divination. It's just about how much intention and symbolic energy that you put into it will give you more and more levels and layers of meaning. But with coins, you might be able to get 2 hexagrams out of it, which we did here because there are some changing lines. So I'll just talk about, we'll do them one at a time, and I'll talk about it and let you talk about it, what it makes you think, and see how it connects to everything we've been discussing. So the first one that came up is number 33. And it is known as retreat, is how it's translated. In the imagery, you see a flock of birds, probably geese, maybe heading south for the winter or north for the spring. And this is the element of yang, which is your masculine attention, your spirit, spiritual currency, what you're currently able to be aware of in your mind at one time, being supported by the mountain, which is also called keeping still. So it's like the big, unchanging part of yourself that is symbolically like, you know, you have the amount of soul energy that you're currently embodying in a incarnation, and then there's what you are beyond this life that is like the big, unchanging part of yourself. And that's kind of how I consider it to be the mountain element. It's the bigger part of you that doesn't actually change, and things around it change, kind of like that. When you look at the sky clock, how there's a north star that all the other stars seem to spin and move around, but it doesn't ever move. It's kind of like that. It's the eye of the storm. It's the unchanging core. It is the root of the paradox of life, that everything appears to be constantly changing, but what we are as the I am is always exactly what it is, which is the totality, the all. And that's the one aspect that doesn't change. So the retreat hexagram, because of this yang over keeping still, it's about supporting your awareness with stillness, which means that you got to like pull back, you got to withdraw, you got to actually make yourself still so that you can pay attention to what is there when there's nothing else moving, which would be getting in touch with the bigger you, the more complete and total you. In terms of like a divinatory meaning, it's about pulling back and letting go, maybe walking away so that you can have some time to catch your breath or reevaluate what you've been doing in the external world, in the world of motion and movement, And so that when you do return to it, you're energized by the knowing of who you are and your true intentions for this life, getting back in touch with those things by pulling away from everything else. It's like, what I like to say about the retreat card would be, no matter where you go, no matter what you let go of, the truth will always be present. So in life, sometimes it's best to actually just stop everything that's possible to be stopped, and see what is still there. Because what is truly meant for you, what is truly best for you, what is truly sort of destined or intended by your spirit to be part of your life path will never actually go away. It might change form, it might come back in a new form, but even if you let go of everything that you could possibly let go of, some aspects of life and who you are will not go away. So it's like that old saying, if you love something, let it go and let it choose you. The retreat energy is kind of like that. So let go of everything and then see what is still present, which is going to be what is closest to you or what is actually you. And in terms of talking about the process of healing, the process of tuning, it's definitely a type of retreat, because you have to stop and slow down and actually create that space and that intention and that self-reflection and that stillness to bring about the ability to see what's there, what's present, that was obscured by the busyness of us running around in the world of forms and motion.
Thank you, Chance. That's a beautiful interpretation. It feels very, very on point for me right now. I'm feeling very much this need, this I need to reconnect more with my deeper self, to meditate more, to take time to reflect, on stuff. We tend maybe to do too much, and not take some downtime to process or integrate stuff. And many times when doing this, stuff tends to accumulate, and definitely the energetic body, it gets, like the water you mentioned before, it gets all gunky and dirty and unstable perhaps. And this mountain element that you mentioned within is it like it's one of the hexagrams or one of the trigrams that compose the hexagram means the mountain, correct?
So, it's also called keeping still or stillness.
And to me, that part of the hexagram, I was thinking earlier, we were talking about the toroidal field, and it feels like that point at the center of the torus, that's where all the energy converges, and from where all the energy comes out in the center. It's a point. You also mentioned, I think, the eye of the storm, maybe. So it's like that point which is absolutely still and like doing nothing, but at the same time being the crux of the thing, the central point. It's like,
I look at it like the all is also the void.
Exactly. We have this idea of God being the very simple or simplistic idea. God is this being, this thing with a form and a shape and an action and a personality or whatever. That very, I don't mean to disrespect anybody with this type of, but to me, when I think of God, when I talk about God, I talk about something that is behind even those personalities, even the different gods. I mean, if God has a shape, or if it has an opposite, then there is definitely something behind those two, and we tend to think of God as this limited thing. Sometimes people do, and actually God is this nothingness, this everythingness that is behind everything. That is this.
So if you combine all of the elements of existence with their opposite, and they kind of negate each other, that's what the all is like. The all is basically the void is also the all. And so that's why this concept of the big mountain that is unchanging and that keeps still refers to kind of, in my opinion, the all itself, the singularity.
Yeah, and at the same time, that's why it can also bring up the symbol of the still point in the center of everything, something that on the one hand is huge and immense, and the all, it's also the nothing, the stillness. And that's what comes up for me when you brought up that hexagram, how I'm at this point where I feel like the call of relaxing, taking things. Even though I'm a very relatively relaxed guy, of course I can also get a little bit overwhelmed by life and stuff going on, and by the mind itself. Sometimes can be a little bit of a challenger, maybe. But recently I've been getting more in alignment with understanding, with having more clarity of the role of the mind as it's kind of like the mind is like a hand that's offering something, and you, the being, the center of the mountain, you choose if you want to take that or not. But we are like habituated and trained from youth to like almost always at least take whatever the mind suggests, and learning to pause that and have some space between that suggestion and the taking of the suggestion. I think that's so important, and I believe retreat talks a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think so too. And to move forward, the changing lines for this, or the third line and the top line. So we go from 33, retreat, to 45, gathering together. The imagery on this card is a bunch of small trickles of water that are converging into a larger stream, and then that stream is converging into a bigger body of water. So on an elemental level, this is the joyous, it's called, supported by the yin. The yin is the physical container of the body. It is the environment. It is the earth. It is the unconscious mind. So when it is in support of this upper trigram that is known as the joyous is like, I would call it the multiplicity, the plurality of life's expressions. How, there's one spirit, there's one ether, there's one source, there's one nature, but it creates limitless expressions of the same thing. There are all these different human beings that are each unique. There are all these different, there's not just one deer, there's all the deer. Okay, in this dynamic, we're looking at almost the exact opposite of retreat, but in a way that they synergize together, they work together. So we have yin on bottom with gathering together, and yang on top with retreat. We have the mountain or keeping still on bottom with retreat, and we have the joyous or the multiplicity, the plurality on top with gathering together. So just like in the process of the tuning that we've talked about, the gathering together is a convergence of what were previously separate flows, separate energetic movements into one larger body. So on a symbolic level, you could look at this as like coming together with your tribe, having a shared experience with multiple people, But on a base energetic level of the fractal, we're talking about how energy always wants to find a way to synchronize and flow together. Like life, they say, is this experience of us coming back home to source, where we spin out to the edge of this larger toroidal fractal that is the all, in its spin and its expression and its movement, or in the illusion of that movement. And we hang out there on the far edge, as far from source as we can exist and still live, until we realize that actually we are in charge of the process of how much closer we want to move to that source, and that it's not really automatic. Although, there may be some experiences that come through that feel like destiny, that kind of shake us up or give us a little peek through the cracks towards what direction source is and help us see where to move if we want to go towards it. But it's just like the same exact thing goes on in nature, where you have streams, water that flows downhill, and all the water sources eventually find a way to join together until you have them converging in the river, which then flows out into an ocean. The same thing goes on in our biofield, in our energetic field. Like, even if we have separate little vortexes and eddies and currents of energy that have been blocked off from the rest of our energetic field and flow, that we were calling this compartmentalized energy or this fragmented self energy, there will be some process, and it's going to feel like rolling downhill, because there will be some process that life or nature presents to us that actually breaks up the walls between us and that feeling, or that awareness of ourself, or this version of ourself that we've blocked off. So those processes are going to feel like a fall or a drop, because for us to get made aware of it, it's going to have to like kind of hit us over the head with some sort of experience. Like, for me, most of my life, I would stub my toes all the time, really painfully, really terrible. And I didn't have any reason to believe that there was anything other than that was just normal. And then eventually, later in life, I learned Qigong and started getting into deeper levels of awareness of my body and my energy field through this practice. And I realized that I don't stub my toe anymore. I got into this self-awareness practice, this body rooted in my body practice, and now it doesn't happen. And it's not like I'm doing anything different. I'm still just moving about, doing my thing, but there's this deeper level of consciousness and awareness about my body, where my edges are, where I begin, and where the environment is. And so I don't really have these moments of stubbing my toe. But at the time that I was stubbing my toe all the time, I didn't realize that that was a clue and an indicator of where I could improve my flow, which would be to get more body awareness through some kind of practice that enhanced that. But when it did happen, then I realized that all that downhill moment of the pain of stubbing my toe was trying to wave a flag at me and show me what direction to go. So I hope that makes sense, that, the streams are going to converge into one somewhere, somehow. And we're able to facilitate and enhance that process. And in doing so, the more that we gather together all the different streams of energy within ourselves into one flowing, strong, unified field, the more that we're going to encounter in the outer world people to gather together with, other beings to gather with, that are a reflection of that exact intention and exact harmony, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, it does. The thing that, well, first, the hitting your toes, you made me remember, maybe it wasn't very, very regularly when I was young, but I remember every now and then I would hit like the small toe. That's the worst. And then the other thing with this gathering together that comes up is, again, earlier we were talking about not just the chakras, but also the nervous system, and the hands and the feet being like the ends of that. And this card makes me think, okay, so and it also connects with retreat, going back to the center. like I see the energy. I can like visualize the energy in the hands and the feet, and bringing them back into the central channel, and that gathering together. So it's like, again, like those streams that are shown in the card, that are going down into a single pool at the bottom. That could maybe represent, maybe even further, it could mean something connected to the Kundalini energy. But even before that, it feels like this going back into the central channel. And for me, that generally represents, or that generally is connected to the breath, and to working with the breath in a conscious way. And that's one of the ways that I like to meditate most. One of them is chanting. Another one, of course, is probably sitting and just observing my breath. And then you have taking that same awareness to the everyday things that you do outside of the sitting and more like a technical, let's say, posture, trying to meditate in everyday action, in just being here, sitting, talking to you. But to me, it's very much connected to working with the breath. And those are one of the, like, I've found several different kriyas that I've started practicing that I feel energize me and give me a lot of clarity. And they feel like, if you are like expanded, not expanded in this case particularly, but like extended, outside of where you know yourself, and there's some confusion around you, bringing back that energy, calling it back through the breath, and focusing, going up and down the central channel. For me, that's a very powerful exercise. And yeah, that's what comes up for me with this I-Ching card.
I love it, man. I-Ching's definitely my favorite of divination tools. It's quite a lot different than tarot, but it's where I first started with all of this, and it's given me endless amounts of insight. I feel like, even though I've worked with it for probably a decade, I feel like I barely know anything. Mm-hmm. Nobody even knows where the heck it came from. It's pretty cool.
You know what? I had this woman on the show. She's amazing. Her name is Betty Kovacs. She wrote a book, which I think I have here next to me, but I'm not seeing now. And just not to waste time looking for it, the book is called Merchants of Light. And in that book, she's talking about, in a particular part of the book, she's talking about how the symbolic language and the rational language are, how the symbolic language comes first, and the rational language comes out of the symbolic throughout, let's say, like human development, or through the ages, etc. And it's not a thing of like, so one language is more important than the other. They are both complementary. And through tarot and the different, for example, let's say in tarot and I-Ching in this case, they feel like, just like English and Spanish are two different rational languages, tarot and I-Ching feel like two different symbolic languages. So like you were saying, they're very different, but then immediately within me I felt, yeah, but they're like the same. And what is that sameness that they have is that they are both talking through symbols, through images, and through kind of like a more poetic thing. And how in stories there tends to be this moment that is more satisfactory if the characters are there's these moments when, like, for example, in Hitchcock movies, this is a very good example of what I'm trying to say. The character, for example, is a photographer, and eventually throughout the movie he doesn't do anything with photography other than just tell you in some way that he's a photographer, but eventually there's this thing that he ends up having to use the camera for something very important for the resolution of the thing. So there's that the symbolic thing, and then that also happens, for example, very clearly in this show called Curb Your Enthusiasm, how everything that they mention at the start kind of loops and closes at the end. It's like, oh, because he gave the finger to this character, then this character did whatever, and this ended up like biting him in the ass at the end, for example. And those kind of loops make this very meaningful and symbolic weight, you know, and they have this big symbolic presence in stories. And I feel like we were speaking before how life is just as symbolic as the dream, and how there's meaning in what we do in our waking life. There is this symbolic weaving back and forth of things, and like you look back and you start seeing, oh, this is how this thing that happened to me makes sense today, because thanks to that, there was this poetic thing that developed and gave a kind of a fruit in my life today. And I think that's so nice to start living life from this new perspective and being more in contact with this symbolic part of our being, which has been forgotten for so long.
Absolutely. Actually, what I consider to be the mystical way of interpreting language would to find the poetry in the words themselves. Like the fact that a daisy is a day's eye, the eye of day. It opens up during the day. It has like a formation like an eye. It has 8 petals. An eye is an archaic word that actually is where we get the root of the word eight. I. And so there's words like that. There's words like potato, which means in French, they call it an earth apple. In German, they call it, in French, it's a pomme de terre, means apple of the earth. There's poetry in the phrase for it. The Germans call the potato Erdapfel. I don't know if I'm saying that right in the way Germans would pronounce it, but it's like Erd or earth, Apfel, apple. So whenever we get past just looking at words and language and the prosaic level, which is just the dictionary definition and sort of the sterile, dead aspect of language, and we can also decipher the poetry in the words themselves, and this definitely applies to like scriptural texts as well. Then we're seeing it from a right brain and left brain perspective. We're seeing it with our third eye, with both eyes in balance. And I think this is where the real goodness is in life, is to get back to the poetry, that life is not just a mechanistic, meaningless sequence of events, that everything has a poetic meaning to it that can be derived. And the beautiful thing about poetry is the meaning is limitless. Like, just because there's one meaning there doesn't mean it's the only meaning. And we can keep looking again, reflecting, like the infinite mirror that we are, like 2 mirrors facing each other. It always goes further. It's a sort of infinite recursion loop, and language is like that. Even going back to the origins of language, which the very first written scripts were numerical in nature. And that first recording of number, those numerical digits became also letters, which became the first written languages. And that's why things like Hebrew and Greek and other ancient languages, each of the letters has a numeric value associated with it, because that's what they were first. And in the same way, numbers have qualitative properties. They're not just cold, dead, sterile digits, the way that most modern people look at it. Like, what about the number 6? Why does 6 sound like sex? Why is 6 2 3s, like 2 trinities together? There's so much about the 6 that is also then demonized with the whole like 666 idea that dogmatic Christians might hold on to as meaning an evil number. And, I'm not saying any number is good or evil. No number should be worshipped and no number should be feared. But in terms of like the 6-pointed star and the 666 and different things of like how this number 6 gets kind of tied to the idea of a beast system or a devil, well, consider how the controllers and the manipulators of religions in the past they've actually used the sexual or sexual energy against the people by getting people to repress sexuality, to look at sexuality with a tinge of guilt. And then as the pendulum swings the other way, they become consumed by sexual energy. It becomes a destructive force. And it's not used in a healthy and balanced and beautiful way, the way nature would intend it. This is 6, or sex is neutral energy, but the charge that gets put on it by the beliefs that are implanted in people's unconscious mind about how it's dirty or bad or sinful, then create the very outcome of them using it in a way that is toxic or corrupted or, not healthy. So just a few examples of what you're talking about, but everything is poetry. And the more we open up to that and read life that way, the more meaningful life will become, and thus more exciting, interesting, and fun as well, which I believe is like your clue as to whether or not you're on the right path or moving in the right direction, is how much fun are you having with it. Fun is the real compass, in my opinion, towards what we're here to be doing. Why shouldn't life and existence be fun? I know for certain that whenever all of our chakras are opened and balanced and energized, it feels good. It feels fun. Why does good sound like God? Do you appreciate and feel more connected to God or the divine or source when you feel good? Do you feel more troubled by evil? Or, I like to say good health or purity of thought is a consequence of good health, right? There's all these connections here that when we feel good, we connect to God. So the path to the creator and to expressing yourself as a creator always has been and always will be to further improve and align your health in the best way possible. And then there'll be more meaning accessible to you on every level and dimension that you have awareness in.
Again, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Chance. You made me for a moment remember this teacher, this literature teacher. How teachers, one of those sayings, like in these weird times we're living, teachers destroy or teachers destroy education, doctors destroy health, politicians destroy politics or whatever. And I remember we read the books and then she'd say, okay, what did the author mean? And it's like, again, like you were saying, it's a kind of a dead thing, it's like, okay, this is written and it has only one meaning, and the meaning must be whatever the teacher says that the author meant or whatever. And rather than, okay, what does this mean for you? Or both things. What do you think the author meant? And what does it mean for you? I remember there was this story of two brothers. It's a very interesting, I don't know if it's in English as well. I can't remember the author right now. I'll see if I can find it. It was called, in Spanish, the name is La Casa Tomada. I believe that's the name. It's about two brothers that are living in a house. And at that point, she's not sewing. What do you call sewing with the big things? Knitting, right? Yeah, she's knitting, and she's knitting with I think it's purple wool. And so our teacher says, purple. She's sewing knitting with purple because that means she's she's when someone dies, she's in mourning, because purple means the color of mourning or something like that. And I was like, what? Where? Maybe it does, but I would never guess that because she's so knitting with purple wool that the author is supposed to have meant that she was mourning. I think these were more like stuff people projected onto the thing, and then because they're teachers, they think they know everything. And
well, to throw a loop,
yeah,
to throw this all for a loop, the ancients actually, especially like the ancient Egyptians, they did not have this idea of just sort of express yourself and make anything any which way. What does it mean to you? They didn't exactly do things that way. And some Egyptologists and historians look at their style and go, wow, they made things the exact same way for thousands of years without changing it. So they must have had a very rigid society without any allowance of creative expression. But another way of looking at that is that what they had done was they understood the code. They understood what color, shape, form, vibration, and all these things mean innately in nature. And so they were able to create art that had a very specific intention behind it, that generated a very certain feeling and a very certain vibrational level of information. And so everyone that beheld that art would connect to it in a similar way, and it wasn't exactly interpretive in the same way that art is considered to be now, and like art for art's sake. And I see a lot of value to that idea, actually, because right now I believe that the exact same symbolic canon still exists, of like these colors have these associations, this shape has this feeling and vibration to it. But now what happens is when people create their art sort of willy-nilly without an understanding of this symbolism, then what comes through is at the mercy of the unconscious. And so sometimes like the dark side comes through.
Right, I see what you mean.
Unconscious is the dark side.
Yeah, maybe there's this kind of predefined kind of correlations, right? And which as I understand you're saying are probably universal. Sometimes I call that, jokingly, or stuff like that, I call it the OCD of spirituality. It's like you're gonna do a ritual and the candle has to be this color and you have to place it here and it needs to be looking west, and the fire or whatever, and etc. Which I'm not making fun of it like it's ridiculous, but actually pointing out that there is something to what you're saying. I'm pretty sure there is this kind of universality in symbols, and at the same time there is an openness for, in my opinion at least, it's like
yeah, I see. I'm with you. I think that the best approach is kind of in the middle there, the middle path between the rigidity and the flexibility.
Yeah, you can totally follow this universal grid, let's say, but at the same time, for example, in different systems, I remember there's this one system where wind, I think it's the natives from South America or Central America, the air element represents the ancestors. But then there was this other, I don't remember right now, but another system where the air element represented something kind of very, very opposite to that. And that got me thinking, like, okay, why would it mean, or the ancestors perhaps is the earth, let's say, right? So on one system, the ancestors is the air, but on another system, it's the earth. And you're like, okay, which one is right? Which one is wrong? Or which one is more right? Which one is more wrong? Or how to look at each one and understand how it's valid, right? How this symbolically, how does it all end up connecting and making sense, right? I think those are relatively open questions, because I believe this is from like very ancient traditions. So there's definitely validity in both of them. And who knows how one could choose one from the other than through resonance inside oneself, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the whole, all the archetypes that we're discussing, which are these different symbolic meanings, they live within us.
Definitely. And so wrapping up this second hour, this has been great, lots of fun. I would like to ask you one final question, which I'm starting to ask guests. What is the one thing that brought you here?
My mom. She gave birth to me. No, man, what brought me here was long ago, the realization of, okay, there's a void inside me. I feel empty. I feel unfulfilled. Why is that? In my early 20s, after graduating college and feeling directionless. And I realized that the void was because I wasn't creating anything. So I just started drawing really low skill level amateur Sharpie doodles and drawings, and I just kept creating things to fill the emptiness of being unfulfilled by not creating. I think we're here to create. And so every step along the path since then has been me finding what is the most exciting thing to create and keep doing it until, I find a new thing that is more exciting than that and start with that. And all the different skills and aspects of creativity that I've developed through that path of just keep making, just keep creating, has all led me here. And all those skills have converged into all the different things that I now do for my living. And I feel extremely, extremely grateful to have created ultimately the masterpiece that is still a work in progress of my life itself, where I can work for me and work for others, but not be in anyone else's agenda or on anyone else's payroll, and just doing what I'm most authentically excited about and feeling called here to do.
Beautiful. So following your bliss, following your passion and creating. I love that. You can find Chance Garton on Innerverse, on innerversepodcast.com. Is that correct? Yeah. And please check out his podcast. It's a very, very fun place to be, and also be on the lookout for that other, the weaving spiders. I'll have links for all of this interesting stuff in the description below the video. And you can find me on Instagram at @atmanrafa. And you're also very much, well, you're actually probably right now on Patreon. So yeah, if this is actually, if I made this one public, I welcome you very much to join the Patreon community. And well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Chance. I really loved meeting you and connecting. I feel this like the mirror thing we've been talking about. We look kind of similar. We've had a similar. We work with similar stuff. We've had similar things happening in life, probably, and as well as many very different ones. And
we're all more similar than we are different.
We are, definitely. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day, a great rest of your week, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.